Welcome to the Firestarter Podcast. People, ideas, and conversations that move us forward. I'm your host, Willa Kammerer, and it's my passion, my purpose, and my business to make the world a better place through storytelling, which is why we're here today. We'll talk to mission-driven entrepreneurs, philanthropists, and investors, thought leaders, researchers, and experts on the front lines of the world's most pressing issues about designing and thriving in careers of impact. My guest today is Michael Hennessy, the innovative CEO of Wavelength Lighting, who is seeking to address the carbon footprint of buildings in New York City. After discovering that 20% of a building's carbon footprint is used for lighting, he knew he could make a number of small yet effective changes to reduce that energy consumption by 90%. Not only that, he knew he could lower the cost of LED lighting and make it more enjoyable for the eyes, all while cultivating a lighting as a service platform. Prior to Wavelength, Michael worked as an analyst and investor in clean energy finance at firms such as Bloomberg and Weiss Multi-Strategy Advisors. His passion for clean energy was sparked right after college, and he has been laser-focused ever since. In today's conversation, we discuss the history of lighting, unexpected pathways that can lead to entrepreneurial endeavors, and the nuts and bolts and challenges and opportunities of running a business, as well as our shared alma mater, a place we both love, Middlebury College. I'm so excited to bring you this conversation with Michael, and hope that it inspires the reluctant entrepreneur in all of you. So our connection traces back to Middlebury College. We were on campus at the same time, but we didn't know each other, but you definitely look familiar, which is a pretty common Middlebury thing. And we were connected by our mutual friend, Chris Cadwell, who's also your business partner. So that's enabled us to be here and have this conversation today. So welcome.
Yeah, thank you. So, at Middlebury, I spent a considerable amount of time at the Snowball, the ski area, probably more than was academically healthy. But I'm 90% sure that I met you there at some stage. So I think, yes, nice to see you again.
Definitely. Well, I was on ski patrol, so there's no way we didn't cross paths.
Well, there you go.
So you're the founder and CEO of Wavelength Lighting based in Brooklyn. Can you give our listeners a little elevator pitch about what Wavelength Lighting does?
Of course. So Wavelength Lighting develops and implements energy efficient lighting and lighting controls projects. We focus on commercial interiors in New York City. We approach the industry in two different ways. One, we work with existing facilities, so facilities that are operating, offices, schools, that kind of thing, and we'll retrofit their system to energy efficient LED lighting. And then the second thing that we do is we'll work with somebody who is building out a space, either in a new construction environment or a refit kind of environment where they're doing a lot of things to the space, not just lighting, and we will be the entity that designs an ultra-efficient lighting system and brings it to bear for them. What makes us unique, as it were, in the lighting industry here in New York is that we bring a number of lighting competencies that are typically siloed into different organizations into one organization. So those would include lighting design, equipment distribution, electrical work. Those are some examples of things that would typically be done by multiple parties, but we do it as one. We focus only on lighting, so we're not pulled in a lot of different directions in terms of the technologies that we work with, and that makes us more efficient, more cost effective, able to deliver systems more quickly than most others out there.
Yeah, very cool. So, I'm curious about how all this started. You studied economics and French in college. Walk us through your pathway after graduation and how your interests and knowledge, about LED lighting really started.
Yeah, I came out of Middlebury without an ultra clear vision of what I wanted to do. I took a fairly non-specific finance job in New York City out of college, and but very quickly, once out of school and into the professional world, very quickly realized that clean energy was extremely interesting to me. very much wanted to be in that, and as quickly as I could, left my first job there into something that was clean energy focused. I went to work for a bank, basically educating investors on clean energy companies and the clean energy space. Enjoyed that thoroughly. Learned for a few years. The recession hit in 08 and 09. I lost my job, as many of my colleagues did. Took a year off. When I came back, I went to a research shop that was within Bloomberg that focused on clean energy. So I basically taken the time after that big bank job to think of something that was maybe a little more concretely involved in clean energy. And so I was writing wind industry analysis for this company called Bloomberg New Energy Finance. Also a great place, but as I was sitting there, I was thinking, okay, this is still very removed from actually doing anything. I was very much an observer in the industry that I wanted to support, and having worked with investors in the past, I thought, you know what, that's where it's really at. If I could only work for an investor that invested in clean energy companies, then I'd be doing the thing, not just watching the thing. I would be making capital allocation decisions that would affect companies' growth or other things that would really make an impact on the climate challenge. And so somebody I knew was working for a hedge fund on a clean energy portfolio. He hired me, and I went to work for him for a few years. And again, I think for me that expanded my horizons. It did feel more and more closely involved with somebody with a role that was actually doing something for the climate challenge. But even there, even as an investor, you really do feel removed, because you really are. I mean, you're allocating capital. It's all very on paper. There's nothing physical about it. And when I was there, looking at a bunch of different clean energy and resource efficiency companies from an investor perspective, I narrowed in on lighting as something that was totally unappreciated as compared to the things that people typically associate with clean energy: wind power, solar power, biofuels, electric vehicles. And so I felt like it was underappreciated, and I couldn't, as an investor, figure out why it wasn't happening faster. So as an investor, I'm looking at these companies that make LED components, and they're not doing very well. And I'm looking at what an LED light is, and how it makes sense to put it in, and why it works, and what the return on investment is for a light, and all this kind of thing, and thinking, man, this makes so much sense. I just couldn't figure out why it wasn't moving more quickly. And so that kind of planted the seed in me that this was maybe something I would need to figure out one way or another. And then ultimately decided that I didn't particularly enjoy the hedge fund world. It's got its own thing going on, but again, I just arrived at the conclusion that I wasn't really doing anything for the climate challenge, which is what I started out trying to do. So left the hedge fund and got into the lighting business, which is a whole different thing. But so that's where it all started.
Yeah, well, so many follow-up thoughts and questions with that. The lighting industry is definitely not new. It's been around for more than 100 years. What were some challenges and opportunities that you saw with that? Because it isn't this newer industry like wind power or solar.
Yeah, I think the biggest, so the first thing that comes to mind is the fact that it's such an old industry. It's something that people already have. And so there isn't the same, a term that you'll see in energy, or I don't know, I think a lot of industries is greenfield scope. So when solar power came around, everything was very greenfield in the sense that there wasn't an existing format for how solar power would be bought and sold or installed or anything like that. It was all very new, and people who were involved in it on all sides were open to new things. Whereas lighting pre-exists for everybody. It pre-exists for suppliers, it pre-exists for consumers, and so that makes transition a little more difficult. We've ultimately found in that suppliers that have been supplying conventional lighting for 50 years aren't well equipped to immediately pivot over to a completely different technology. People that have been consuming lighting, so in our instance, office buildings, schools, entertainment venues, things like that, they've been consuming lighting in one way, and so for them to completely change their thinking on lighting from conventional lighting to LEDs, or from lighting as a consumable, which it typically is because you have these lights that are constantly going out and you're just constantly consuming them, to sort of a capital asset, which is something that might last in your space for 5, 10, 15 years. So yeah, I think that's like, if that's answering your question. I mean, that's what I see as the biggest challenge in terms of like lighting versus some of these other clean energies.
Yeah. Well, you were kind of touching on it. Let's dig into kind of some of the kind of nuts and bolts, advantages of LED lighting. I came across a few in my, preparation for today that LED lighting can reduce your energy consumption by up to 90%, can deliver a 400% ROI, and just the low maintenance that you mentioned. Just, it seems like there's so much that they are, something that stick around for a lot longer than conventional lighting.
Yeah, no, it's an incredible technology. So a quick lighting history lesson. The electric lighting turn of the 20th century became a thing, and you had a wire that we call a filament inside of a bulb, and you run electricity through that wire to the point that the wire gets so hot that it glows. And so, as you can hear from that, lighting is a byproduct of heat in that instance. So if you have a 60-watt light bulb in your house right now, about 2 watts of that 60 end up being light, and about 58 become heat. So you've got these little heaters that are also incidentally producing light, and that's extremely inefficient. And then, so between 1900 and maybe 1980, there were some iterations. Okay, now there's fluorescent lighting, which is a lot of what we have in schools and offices today, which is a little more efficient. Maybe 10% of the energy that you put into a fluorescent light becomes actual light, as opposed to maybe it was like 2, 3, 4, 5 with that filament. LEDs now, the most efficient of them, they'll convert about 25% of the electricity that you run through them into light. It's basically a solar panel in reverse. The technology is semiconductor technology, which I won't get too deep into, but basically you can convert electrons into photons, into light, which is the reverse of what a solar panel does. And it makes the system highly reliable, like you referenced. So these things can last 50 or 100,000 operating hours, which translated into terms people would understand is 12, 13, 14, 15 years or longer, which is again very different from a conventional light bulb that might last for 2,000 hours instead of 100,000 hours. So they last a super long time. And they're extremely efficient, and they're well understood now. So when I started this company, LEDs were not something everybody understood, but now they're well understood. There are a ton of them produced globally, so they're a very reliable technology now. And they're definitely where things are going, and it's a question of how quickly we can transition. And that's what my focus is.
Yeah. So, did you set out to be an entrepreneur and start your own company? Where did this spark come from?
No, I didn't. I would classify myself on the reluctant side of the entrepreneurial spectrum. No, it's not something I envisioned at school. It's not something I envisioned in my early clean energy career. It's really not something I envisioned until it was happening. The more focused I got on lighting, the more that I understood what was going on, the more I understood why change wasn't happening as quickly as you might expect naturally from such a compelling technology. The more I realized that there was a business model that was not being really run at all, and that I was somewhat uniquely suited to execute on. So, basically decided that I would just do it myself, and that's where it ended up. I've been running this company for a number of years now, about 8. And I love the work, but in terms of entrepreneurialism, I don't recommend it. It's highly stressful. Highly rewarding too, but I think it's something that I do because I really I'm compelled by the work, and I wouldn't otherwise.
Well, it makes two of us. I definitely, didn't set out to be, a business owner and entrepreneur myself. It definitely wasn't really kind of on my radar, during college, after college, as an option. But I kept trying to do the things that I wanted to do, and being self-employed was the framework that I could do those things in. So here we are, more than a decade later.
Cool. Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, so on a personal level, you talk about like you're an entrepreneur, you're running this company because, you have this drive to make a difference, make an impact on the climate challenge. And, on a personal level, what drives your passion for sustainability?
Yeah, just that the climate challenge is huge, and very serious. Don't want to sound preachy, but all of the things that are out there that are fascinating, the economic realities of things, politics, even culture. I mean, it's all fascinating, but it all operates on the backdrop of a healthy physical system. And so without that system, which to the best of my understanding is quite fragile in general and at the moment, without that system, nothing else really matters. And so, it just seems like a huge challenge. I mean, the biggest trick for me is almost not thinking about how big of a challenge it is, because I need to stay focused on what I can control. But I find the whole thing to be highly motivating in the sense that success in sustainability is, it matters more than anything, and so being able to contribute to that is important.
Yeah, definitely. Agreed. So I think, you alluded to some of the challenges of running a company, being an entrepreneur. I think there's kind of this mystique around entrepreneurship and startups, and just this kind of sense that, okay, I'm going to start a company and it just like pops out of a box and is fully operational. What were, you've been at this, 8+ years, what were the early, days, weeks, months, years like, as you were kind of getting this off the ground and going?
Yeah, fun, a grind. I think a grind is probably the way a lot of entrepreneurs would describe early days. I would just, in the interest of distinguishing my experience from others, I never venture funded the company. It's been bootstrapped from the beginning, which is good in the sense that I don't answer to investors, but bad in the sense that I don't have just disposable capital to grow incredibly rapidly. So it's more, I think Wavelength is more small business than it is startup, and so that means that things build on themselves very slowly, and you have to kind of wait for that compounding growth to feel like something. So the early days were, so first of all, the LED technology wasn't even then, which isn't that long ago, where it is now. So back when I started the company, LED products were suitable for replacing those filament light bulbs we were talking about earlier. And so those are in endpoints like retail stores. Not really, office lighting wasn't even really addressable at the time. And so what I started doing was walking around the streets of Brooklyn, walking around the streets of New York, and walking into retail and trying to talk to business owners about lighting, about LEDs, telling them what an LED was, telling them what I was trying to do. At the time, one of the solutions that I was offering was a financed lighting solution. So I would basically go into these places and say, hey, for no upfront cost, we will get you some LED lights, and then you'll save $100 a month on your utility bill, and you'll pay us $50 a month or something like that. And if they were good with it, I would order some lights. I would call a friend of mine. We would go over, climb up the ladder, change the lights, and that was at least 18 months of Wavelength. I was doing the physical installation along with whoever I could wrangle, and so then it was it all started with coffee shops and independent retail, and that became mid-sized retail, and that became small office, and then larger office, and then the technology was coming along, in parallel with our expansion. Was okay. Now there were lights that you could deploy in offices. That you could replace a fluorescent light that you might find in an office now with an LED. That was sort of 4 or 5 years into the company's life, and then now we work with cities' big universities, and we did a lighting project at the Barclays Center, which is a large sort of multi-use arena here in Brooklyn, and there's still a basically infinite amount of work to do, but we've come a long way from me changing lights in a coffee shop. Although I will say there are a few coffee shops that still have my original lights in them, and I will I will often go back and just appreciate that they're still there. I guess I don't know.
That's awesome. Yeah, I love that. Yeah, I mean, running down, your client list, the companies that you've worked with, it's definitely, you have evolved a long way from those early days with the ladder. Barclays, as you said, Kenneth Cole, Etsy, Warby Parker, Blackstone, just to name a few. And so you're really on the front lines of talking to businesses and hearing what they're, saying about sustainability and their interest in that. But I think also, wanting to generate larger profit margins through the efficiency of LEDs. I'd love to hear just, some of the things that you're hearing from your clients and customers, and also, what some of the, projects and results are.
Sure. So what you mean? What by what we're hearing from customers, like on the
like what they're like the pressures that they're facing as a business, like, okay, we need to become more sustainable, but maybe they're also looking to improve their profits as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I mean that's relevant question. I think the last 12 months have been like really revolutionary for the sustainability thing. So again, I've been doing this for a while, and for a long time it was purely that financial return element, which is really compelling, or improving the operational efficiency of your facility, which is really compelling. But sustainability didn't enter into it. So we have these proposals that have various elements, some information about lighting, some information about savings, and then we have this sustainability sheet that sort of sits at the end of the proposal that we've always put in there because it's something we care about, but we put it at the end because nobody else cares about it. But now people care about it. I mean, some of those names you mentioned, again, just in the last 12 months, it's all of a sudden the ESG team now has real agency within the organization. So which we think is just awesome. There are now real demands for companies to understand what their energy footprint is. They want to understand where the materials are coming from, what the manufacturing practices are of those materials. They want to understand that everything is being done in a way that is conscious, which is super different. And honestly, for something like lighting, we're finding the integration to be pretty smooth. The appearance of ESG personnel in the meetings that we have has been great, because we think those people are just they give support to initiatives that reduce waste and reduce energy consumption and improve the quality of the interior for the employees, the students, or whoever, which is something that lighting will do. So I think it's motivating, and I'd love to see it. I'd love to see it stick.
Yeah, I mean, where do you think that shift is coming from? Is it COVID and everyone, kind of changing routines? Is it just a growing, new administration, growing, awareness about the climate, issues? Or
I think the last thing, honestly, I think it's finally, it's a finally kind of a thing. Like it's a finally collective understanding of how serious the climate issue is, and that you mentioned administration, and I think we're all pretty hopeful that the current administration, who's already super focused on climate in a way that the previous one wasn't, will help. But a lot of this ESG growth happened during the last administration, despite of the last administration, and so honestly, I think part of it is also there's been a fairly protracted period of economic growth in this country, and has given companies the leeway to think about these ESG initiatives and to take them seriously. Now that the seriousness of them is well understood, and I think the way what we're seeing from our clients is like these ESG teams are really weaving social and environmental and governance practices deep into the DNA of these companies, the way that every little thing works. And so hopefully that even if economic conditions change or administrations change or whatever, that it'll be pretty deeply embedded in such a way that it continues.
Well, that's great to hear. And it's, it's just cool how you've been kind of hammering at this thing, over years, and that kind of finally the, ESG practices and, the way businesses, companies are thinking about this are kind of catching up to what you've been doing all along. So kudos to you.
Well, yeah, thank you. I mean, I don't know. Lighting is an interesting one because it has made economic sense for so long, and so that's why I've always thought it's a compelling way to get people to reduce the amount of energy they consume, is because it makes such good financial sense. And there are some other ESG initiatives that are equally important, equally valid, and don't have an economic return. So I think it's just good to see that, like, the whole tide of ESG rising. But we're certainly involved and certainly happy to see it.
Yeah, definitely. So, you mentioned before that, like, in past years, your clients were more focused kind of on the improving profit and, the kind of cost savings part of things. Can you talk about that aspect as well? Just like what are those savings?
Sure. Yeah. So when we do an LED project, we typically will reduce the energy consumed by the lighting between 60 and 80%. A lot depends on what kind of lighting they have currently. The more inefficient it begins, the more efficiency we drive. But in any case, we reduce the lighting energy consumption by over half. And that does that. Almost all of our work is done in New York City, which has a very high cost of electricity. So that also really supports return on investment, because if you're spending a ton on electricity, like everybody does in New York City, being able to save electricity is really compelling from a financial perspective. So yeah, these systems will pay themselves back in typically less than 3 years, and if they last for somewhere between 7 and 10 years, then your return on investment is at least 200%, sometimes 300, 400%. And yeah, that's highly compelling. It's interesting for the people that we deal with. Life in New York City for a business is very expensive. Life in New York City for a university is very expensive. They have the costs of these entities are huge when you think about their rent or their people, things like that. So actually, utility costs are a very small part of an economic picture for, say, a financial institution or a law firm or whoever. So what we're actually saving them is not necessarily material for their broader financial picture. It just the financial return helps facilities managers or energy managers. It helps them convince the entity to do the project. Typically, the people we work with want to do the project for other reasons, like they want the lights not to be going out anymore because that's a pain. And when you do an LED project, lights aren't going out anymore. If you had 100 lights go out before, you have one light going out now. So the operational reliability improves dramatically, and people really like that. The light quality also improves. The fluorescent lighting we've mentioned a couple times already. It's really unattractive. Nobody likes fluorescent lighting. Hurts your eyes, makes you look not great. And so when you introduce LED lighting, the light quality improves. And so it's these things that people are after, and then the fact that it pays for itself and then some makes the whole transaction palatable with finance folks. And so the fact that we're continuing to deal with people that manage these buildings, and we still have, we're still able to bring to bear the things they're interested in. We're still able to bring to bear the things that the financial people are interested in, and now the ESG people are also in the room pushing for it. Will hopefully catalyze, continued pace of change here in New York and elsewhere.
Win-win-win.
Yeah.
From where you sit, what do you see as, the power and also the responsibility of businesses to really take the lead, on the climate, climate issues and environmental issues more broadly?
They have huge responsibility. I mean, because businesses control a lot in the way of assets, both physical assets and financial assets, and the way that they manage those things matters a ton. The built environment consumes a lot of energy, and so if you're a business that has some control over that energy consumption, you you are accountable for that, in the broader sustainability context. I think being on the business side of it, I feel very grateful, honestly, for the other portions of it. So I sort of think about the three main elements of sort of sustainability, responsibility, being businesses like we're talking about, and then government, and then activism. And I sort of feel like activism drives policy, and then policy often drives business. A lot of the people I deal with on the business side, they're very responsive to policy, meaning they're not really proactive around getting way ahead of what the policy is indicating. But in New York City, for example, there's a law that's been passed called Local Law 97, which sets very strict emissions reductions targets for the city over a period of time, and that is starting to guide the conversation with people that I deal with on what they think they need to do with their facilities over time. And so it's incumbent on businesses to push and to make these things happen. But yeah, the reality is they are responsive to policy, which is responsive to activism. So I felt like for my career, this is where I'm suited. But I can see the work of like a lot of people that you probably knew at Middlebury as well, that I knew that were working at 350.org and these other incredible organizations. It filters through and so as much as I'd like to think that businesses will sort of lead the way into the future, the reality is they are responsive to policy framework, and that lighting's included in that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think it's all about finding like the kind of the authentic way for you to kind of plug into what you care about. And, I realized at a, certain point at Middlebury, as much as, I wanted to do something that made a difference. And I realized that, kind of activism and being out there just wasn't something that was kind of like in my nature as much as I admired it and as important as it was,
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's just like, it's a puzzle that needs to, fit together. So if policy is your thing, like we need that, if running a business is your thing, we need that. If activism is your thing, like we need that. So, well, I think this is a good moment to take a short break, and we'll be right back. Here at Firestarter Interactive, we're proud members of the 1% for the Planet network of businesses, having made the commitment to donate 1% of annual revenue to environmental causes. So for every dollar that we earn, 1 cent goes back to planet Earth and our mission to make the world a greener, healthier place for our generation and for future generations. That's $1 of every $100, $10 of every 1,000. It may not sound like a lot, but every dollar adds up. And collectively we can and are making a huge impact. With 1% for the Planet members giving back more than $280 million and counting to the environment. Visit 1%fortheplanet.org. That's 1% for the planet, all spelled out, to learn more. We hope you'll join us. And we're back. So we're going to switch gears a little bit and dig a little bit deeper into your personal experience as an entrepreneur. How do you relate to this idea of connecting with your why and living your purpose? Does that resonate with you? And, how do you relate with the pathway that you're on? Sure.
It resonates for sure. I think it's true for all kinds of entrepreneurial ventures, but it's very difficult. It's been a very difficult road, very stressful, lots of setbacks, and I think the purpose element of the work and of the path allows you to continue despite those things. So I don't know. I don't think I overthink the purpose element too much on a day-to-day basis, but I do think that I would have given up a long time ago had it not been for the belief that what I'm doing is important, and that I really do need to continue doing it, and I do need to make progress, and I do need to make it grow, and that the growth I can make happen here at Wavelength matters. So it's integral, if for no other reason than it just is something just that keeps pushing you that step forward, even when it's really uncomfortable.
Definitely. Have you noticed any changes in yourself, from the time that you were in, these kind of more traditional roles working with, larger companies, whether it's in your routines, your leadership, your relationship with money, just, anything since you launched your own venture?
I think the biggest change in me since I started this is probably tolerance for risk. So I think I'm a pretty generally risk averse person, and that's part of why I would consider myself a reluctant entrepreneur, because it's just very risky in so many ways. So it doesn't seem like a natural fit for a risk averse person. And so, but I think having done this now for a long time, and having experienced so many of these small failures that are part of the path, that your fear of failure declines, and along with that, your tolerance for risk goes up. And so my willingness to take on, for example, projects that are really complex and maybe aren't something that I've ever done before, or anybody within my organization has done before, I'm just less concerned about the fact that it might fail, than I was previously. My tolerance for risk has gone up. I think if something else has changed, it would be that I've allowed myself to enjoy the physical element of what we do here. So you mentioned that all my roles previously had been basically these traditional finance analyst, investor type roles, sitting at a computer, spreadsheets, presentations, things like that. And then a hard pivot to being on a ladder all the time, which I'm on a ladder a lot less now than I used to be, but I'm still on job sites all the time, still dealing with electricians and the very physical nature of lighting implementation, and I love that. And I don't think I've sort of allowed myself to feel that way during the previous iteration of my career. I felt like, okay, the way that work happens is you sit at a desk and you do a thing. That's work. But it's not. That really wasn't who I am. And so kind of acknowledging that and letting that be part of my day to day has been a positive change.
Well, you found your way, to kind of get on the front lines physically, actually, concretely moving this thing forward, light bulb by light bulb, instead of just a few steps removed.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, I have small children, and sort of for simplicity, but also just because they enjoy it. They just think that I change light bulbs for a living. That is the entirety of what they understand me to do, and so. Sometimes it's like, oh, what'd you do today? I was like, oh, I was on a job site. They're like, were you changing light bulbs? I was like, yes, we were changing lots of light bulbs.
Changing light bulbs, making the world a better place. Are there, particular mindsets or philosophies that you bring to life and work that you credit with your success and kind of ability to be on this pathway?
I think I'd mention something we touched on earlier, which is just this idea of continuing. So I think maybe a fancier word would be perseverance. But I think of it as continuing. So when it comes to accomplishing big things or complicated things, there is no substitute for just keeping going, because things are often much more difficult than you expect. And if you enter into a big challenge hoping it to resolve quickly, or having a really concrete idea of how long it's going to take you, it's unlikely that it will end well for you. Whereas if you are willing to just continue, then it will. And so that's something that I've found with this venture, is that it takes a long time to build and to build on itself. But if you can just continue, then you'll be there when it works. And if you don't, then obviously these things can take a long time. And so yeah, I would say that's the thing that I focus on. Each day is just like putting one more brick on the stack, and hoping to be in a good place at some point in the future.
Well, I think that's where, the purpose and really caring about what you're doing and kind of the larger mission of it really comes in to like give you both that stick to itness and also just the patience, to maybe day by day, brick by brick, like not know how it all fits together, but you're kind of moving things in the right direction.
Yeah, exactly.
Is there anything that you know to be true and important now that, maybe when you were younger or graduating from college, that you wish you'd known?
I think well, yeah. I just being who you are, and that's trite, but it's actually really hard to do. To know what matters to you professionally. I mean, it's hard to know that. It's certainly hard to know that coming out of school because you just haven't been a proper professional. I mean, I had work experience like a lot of people have before graduating college, but nothing that like sort of sustained my existence for a really long period of time. And when you go into the professional world, you do need to sustain your existence for a long period of time. A lot of things change in terms of your relationship to your work. And being able to align that with who you are and what matters to you, as opposed to, say, what you thought would matter back when you were in school, or what you think your parents think matters, or what your friends think matters. It takes a lot of time, or can take a lot of time to match those things up. It took me a lot of time. I don't know if I would say it necessarily took me too much or too little, but it takes each individual however long it takes them. But I think if coming out of school, maybe if there'd been a moment where I just said, you know what, I might actually not know who I am in terms of what makes sense professionally, and I need to keep that question in mind and really be curious about what that might mean for me. Maybe I would have landed in this kind of a role earlier, but you got to walk your own path, and that's what I did.
Yeah, definitely. Well, that kind of, touches on like my next thought question, which is just like, what advice would you have, for, the person coming out of Middlebury or any other college, kind of wanting to do something meaningful, impactful, but just like not sure where to start, or maybe someone who's, already on a career path, but seeking, kind of more meaning and impact, just explore.
Yeah. Exploration is hugely important. I would say one thing that's been successful for me anyway. So that's as far as I can go as my own experience is setting a personal mission that is narrow enough that it's meaningful, but broad enough that you can stick to it 100%. So the one I set for myself, at some point after graduating college was, I wanted to be part of accelerating a transition to a new energy infrastructure. And that's like pretty broad, is the reality of it. There are a lot of things within that. There's a lot of things you could do within that. And I explored a bunch of them. That's kind of what I was doing when I was going from the bank to the research firm to the investment thing, to finally this was, setting yourself a mission that is what matters to you. And feeling like, okay, I'm just going to explore within that realm what really works for me personally. But making sure that when you set your mission, that it doesn't, you don't need to compromise it at all, so that it's broad enough that it's you don't have to feel like there's one specific job that is the one specific thing, and only that really makes sense. It's got to be broader than that, so that you can pivot because life will demand it of you, and the marketplace will demand it of you, and other things are out there, and you just have to be able to, so that's what I would say to a young person, is just figure out what you really care about, define that mission, but in such a way that there's room for you to wind a path.
I think that's really good advice, and I've never thought about it in that way, but I think kind of similarly, I had this vague sense of, one could call it a mission, of what I wanted to do. It was, kind of capturing and telling stories about the world around me, that ultimately, made a positive difference, you know. And I think for the past 10 plus years, you know, I've kind of been winding that path with a lot of different iterations, but it does kind of fit within that framework. So I love that idea of, you know, I think you can also think of, you know, connecting with your why and your purpose, you know, as defining that mission, but not that it has to be so narrow. So I love that.
Yeah. I mean, right. Life is very complicated, and young people will discover that in their own time. So you need to leave yourself room for flexibility. I think that's really important. But at the same time, you want to be motivated by something bigger than just yourself, and finding that and maintaining flexibility is important.
Definitely. So back to Wavelength, you know, what's on the horizon for the company, and what are you excited about?
Excited about the way that it's going. We've been growing really quickly these last 24 months, and you know, the team is doing really well, and I'm excited to continue to hire good people and work with good people. There are billions of square feet of space in New York City alone, which is why we're not trying to expand geographically. New York is just such a big place in terms of the built environment that there really is just a ton of work to do. So I'm excited to continue to prove the Wavelength model of doing things to the marketplace. You know, show that all these like entrenched lighting industry groups are not necessarily the best suited to make the LED transition as efficient and as cost effective as possible. And so really, we've just got our heads down, focused on exactly what we've been doing, just doing it really well and getting bigger at it.
That's awesome. And, you know, looking out to the next decade and beyond, you know, what are your hopes for how we inhabit this planet, you know?
Oh man. Yeah, I hope we continue to inhabit it well. I'm pretty optimistic about the path that we're on. I think things are changing very quickly. Obviously, there's a ton of work to do, and there's also a ton of uncertainty. Even the smartest people out there acknowledge like a pretty wide degree of possible outcomes from a climate perspective, for example. But yeah, as I mentioned, I have kids, and so that's made acute my I don't want to say nervousness. It's too negative a word. Made really acute my awareness of the situation, and I really hope that we take care of the energy picture and the carbon picture, but in doing so are also conscious of habitat preservation and things like that. I mean, I think that like the more I experience the natural world, the more it feels like a single coherent system, really worth caring for. So I'm hopeful that in several decades' time, I can sit with my sons and look back on having done a lot of work to help solve the problem. And while there certainly will be climate issues, hopefully they've they're kept within the bounds of reasonableness. Yeah, that's a big question, Willa.
It is.
But that's
my dog is getting very excited about it in the background.
Yeah.
Well, you know, to kind of break, but I think it comes back to like needing to break it down to like concrete, actionable steps, no matter how small they are. Because if we get totally overwhelmed by the massive challenge, then you know, we're just going to be stuck in this kind of place of inaction. So, you know, that leads me to, you know, do you have any kind of tips or advice for our listeners about kind of like small steps that they can, you know, make in their own, you know, houses, businesses, you know, with LED lighting and
they can change the light bulb. Absolutely. I think that's part of what attracted me to it, was that I know every light bulb I change is just one little set of watts that is being reduced. So yeah, I mean, certainly change your lights to LEDs. They're available at everywhere. Hardware stores, Amazon. It's changing lights is a good thing to do, but any equivalent thing that you can do, I think is worthwhile. And then finding a profession where you feel like you can make the impact you want, however small, and just really just keep pushing and just do as best you can.
Before we sign off, are there any, final reflections you'd like to share with our listeners about business, LED lighting, life?
Be patient, be creative. And I think the earlier you can see how we're all involved in the same challenge, the better. Like I mentioned, activists, policy people, and business people. I think I probably used to think of them as really different breeds, each of the three. But the more I'm involved in the system, the more I realize we're all pretty well connected. So, connect to people, and that's obviously what you're doing with your efforts here, and I think that's pretty awesome.
Well, we all have our different pathways in and are, working with the same mission. So, well, thank you, Michael. This has been an illuminating conversation, if I may, and I really appreciate your taking the time. How can our listeners connect with you and learn more about all the great work underway at Wavelength Lighting?
Thank you for having me. It's been great being here. We have a website, wavelengthlighting.com, that keeps everything pretty well updated. You go to the website, you will at some stage be prompted to sign up for our newsletter, which we take pretty great pride in putting interesting lighting content out there, lighting and policy content out there every month. New York City focus, so take that as it is, but we do try to keep people informed on what we're doing and ways to get involved in improving the energy consumption of the built environment and things like that. And that's where we are.
Awesome. Well, look forward to watching the next chapters unfold, and just thanks for all the great work you're doing.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing another episode of the Firestarter Podcast. People, ideas, and conversations that move us forward. If you haven't already done so, you can subscribe to the podcast, find show notes, as well as the video of today's show at firestarterix.com/podcast. That's firestarterix.com/podcast. Connect with me on Twitter and Instagram at Willa Kammerer, that's Kammerer, and at Firestarterix. And I'm Willa Kammerer on LinkedIn. This is the Firestarter Podcast. I'm your host, Willa Kammerer, and I can't wait to share our next conversation. In the meantime, stay safe, stay well, and let's stay busy making the world a better place.